welcome to another Jew and Gentile podcast. I am your host, Chris Katulka, and with me online is none other than the Jewish sage himself, the one and only Mr. Steve Herzig. How are you, sir?
I'm good, except I can't hear any of the music. I missed out on the music, and I bleeped out, and then I came back. This is going to be an interesting podcast. It might be the Gentile podcast.
Well, I always like that you highlight our technical issues to everybody. You're airing it all out. You know, that's a good thing.
I believe in transparency.
All right, everybody. Well, hold on a minute. Here we go. Welcome in. Well, hey, listen, we've got a great program, and we've got Steve. I'm here in New Jersey. Steve is down in North Carolina. We're going to talk a little bit about why Steve's in North Carolina, but the two of us have been traveling quite a bit since our last podcast. I have been down to Tampa, and I had an opportunity to speak at Bayside Community Church. I love Tampa. That was my first time in Tampa, and so I came back on Sunday night, and then Steve left to go to North Carolina. Steve, what are you doing in North Carolina that we have to do the podcast from a distance?
Well, Chris, I'm at Pittsboro Christian Village, and I'm the speaker here for people who are retired, and it's a village where you come in healthy. It's your last place that you're going to be. Come in healthy, move to the next spot, which is, well, they'll give you meals, and then the last spot is memory care, assisted living, that kind of thing. There's actually people here who are in wonderful health. They drive and go places, but they moved here. They're younger than me. So I'm amongst brethren and sisters my age.
Are you tempted at all to go to North Carolina?
My wife would never allow that. It's too hot and humid. If they have something like this, say in Maine, that might be a good thing.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I hope that everybody can hear us clearly. Steve likes to let everybody know when we have a technical issue, which I don't mind. Steve would actually make a fantastic pilot so that if anything happens, on the plane, he'd get on the speaker right away and say, everybody, we've got a technical issue on the plane right now. So that would be your MO.
Doesn't that drive you crazy, Chris? When something's wrong on the plane, it. There's no question about it. And you're waiting, at least tell us if we're going to die. I want to know what the deal is. You're flying and they don't say anything.
No.
So I want to say stuff. Hey, we blooped out and then we bloop back.
That's right. Bloop is Steve's favorite word to use when technical issues happen. I blooped out. So, Steve,
well, what would you call it, Chris? I call it a bloop.
No, bloop is funny. I actually always appreciate bloop. I feel, see, you just blooped out.
There you go. I just blooped out.
That's right, but you're going to bloop back in a moment. There we go. See, we didn't lose your audio, though. So anyway, hey, listen, we've got a great show lined up for you, even though Steve's in North Carolina and I'm here in New Jersey. We want to continue teaching biblical truth. We want to share it from a Jewish perspective. And so today we're going to be studying continuing our study in the book of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 1 and Daniel chapter 2. We've got some great news for you, a Yiddish word of the day. Steve, when I was down in at Bayside Community Church, I got one of the greatest surprises. And the greatest surprise was our friends who listen to us before they go to bed showed up at the church.
Unbelievable.
To say hello to me. And so I want to give a big shout out to them and thank them for coming. Hopefully, maybe they were just about to fall asleep and then they heard this and they woke back up again. But man, they came right up to me and they said, "Hi, we're the people who listen to you before we go to bed."
I can only imagine the nightmares that they have. Where they're just in sound asleep and a Yiddish word comes and wakes them up.
Yeah.
I just blooped out again.
Yeah, we're gonna title this episode Steve Bloops Out. Okay, just remember that. Okay, Steve bloops out.
Chris, I do have to tell you, what a compliment, in all seriousness, that they would come down. That's not their church that they attend. I don't know how they found out you were there, but they said, you know what? We're gonna hear the Gentile. We want to hear the Gentile.
We prefer the Jewish guy, but we'll take the...
No. They're going with the Goyish guy. I get it. It's no problem. The Goyish guy that looks Jewish. Somebody told me that, I thought you were the Gentile, and he was the Jew. So you never know.
Hey, Steve, I do have to say it's funny whenever I go and speak at a church, I think because I work for the Friends of Israel, I totally understand. People automatically, it's my beard. And I also think it's my complexion. I don't think it's just the beard. I think the beard helps. But people say, oh, my Jewish brother. And I go, oh, I hate to break the news to you because you have this thought, but I'm not Jewish. And so I always love it when people come up. It almost looks like I let them down, Steve. That's the best part. It's like they come with all this excitement. Oh, a Jewish believer. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just like you. All right. You're fine. Get out of here. So.
Well, Chris, if you turn your head slightly to the right, turn your head. That's it. And tilt your head a little back, because right behind you is Theodore Hurt. It's a perfect match. You got to lower the mic a little so everybody could see. Oh, amazing. Look at that. We have Chris Herzig.
Well, Theodore Herzig is my spirit animal, as they would say. So I love Theodore Herzig. Honored to have a beard like Theodore Herzig's. And in fact, we got a text from a listener who bought bobbleheads for his family. And because he liked our bobbleheads so much, and he took a picture, he showed me a picture of his bobbleheads, and guess what? He's got a nice beard too. So he's a beard brother for if he's listening right now. So a lot of exciting things are happening. We want to, as we're going to be diving into the book of Daniel, I want to remind you that you can actually go on our show notes and you can find a link that will take you to Renald Showers' commentary on the book of Daniel. Dr. Renald Showers, he has a book called The Most High God that will do a much better job than Steve and I could ever do on the podcast.
No question about that.
And so if you're interested in learning more in depth about the book of Daniel, the importance of Daniel in biblical prophecy from a Friends of Israel perspective, then I encourage you to go to our the link that's in our show notes for the podcast or on YouTube, and there you can purchase. It's very affordable. I think it's $11 or something like that. A fantastic book.
Chris, that book, I've read it from cover to cover twice, and I started to go through it because of the podcast, and as I've going through it again, it's not that I'm trying to sell a book. I'm really not. I can tell you, not just, as you said, the Friends of Israel perspective, Rennie does the kind of job that as he goes through the text, it really will help you later, as we've already gone through the book of Revelation, but it will help any person, any believer, really connect with that book. And also in the time period in which Daniel was written, and even more importantly, something we're going to talk about today, the practical aspect of Daniel to living today. There is amazing ties, and Rennie does a great job in sharing those things. So I highly recommend it for your Christian life.
Well, so please go to our show notes, and there you can click on the link and purchase Renald Showers' book, The Most High God. Rennie's with the Lord right now, but he had if you don't know Dr. Renald Showers and you're listening to this podcast, he had an amazing ministry, an academic ministry, very important in teaching God's word. And so he not only was a phenomenal teacher, but a phenomenal writer. So again, that's the Most High God.
No one will ever say of me, I had an academic ministry.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true.
It is true. It is. Oh no,
You're like the elementary school academic side of things.
The person that will take the person to the foundation that they have an understanding, and then ship them over to the scholars.
That's right. You know how to get them there. That's the thing.
I know where to go.
Hey, Steve, last night was the first night of the beginning of our FOI Equip internship for 2023.
How'd that go, Chris? How'd that go?
Fantastic. So first of all, for our listeners, the Jew and Gentile podcast is sponsored by FOI Equip. And FOI Equip is much more than just the Jew and Gentile podcast. FOI Equip does amazing ministry in building bridges between the Jewish community and the Christian community. First of all, you can join us on a class that Steve will be teaching tomorrow night for Yom Kippur. That's our FOI Equip online classes. And so if you are listening and you're interested and want to learn more about Yom Kippur and even the Feast of Tabernacles, last week Steve taught on Rosh Hashanah. We've got an amazing fall feast lineup here that Steve's teaching about that you can go to foiequip.org and you could register for the class. But I also want to say this: FOI Equip is more than just the teaching component. It's also the ministry component. And so we have our encounter program where you get an opportunity to experience the Jewish people in Brooklyn and Philadelphia, and you get a chance to learn face to face and talk to Jewish people, interact with them, learn about their culture, their community. Bridges is our training program in Jewish ministry, our online training program that's free, that encourages Christians to learn and be confident in what it means to engage in the Jewish community that's around them. And then we also have our FOI Equip interns. Our interns are actually paid interns, young adults who are engaging in their local Jewish community. And we have 6 of them this year, Steve. And the 6 are actually in two in Canada and 4 in the United States. And I am so excited to see the work that they do. So, you know, if you are a contributor to FOI Equip, and you give, you're not just giving to the Jew and Gentile podcast. You're not just giving to the classes online. You're actually giving to real hands-on ministry, Jewish ministry that's taking place all around the United States, Canada, and even into all around the world with our volunteers that are serving on the Tikva team. So really, FOI Equip is a global ministry that is not only educating about Israel and the Jewish people from a biblical perspective, but also engaging Christians to get involved.
Well, you know, Chris, we have 2 of the 6 are Canadian, as you said. 1 is in Quebec, and he speaks French.
That's right.
I'm very excited about that. We haven't had a French speaker in Quebec in Canada in probably 35 years. When I first came with the organization, we did have someone. His name was Morris. He was a great guy. He was on the college campus. He was engaging with young Canadian students. And then when he went to be with the Lord, to find somebody who's bilingual, you know, wherever I travel, I'll be going to Germany. And wherever I travel overseas, I always say, well, you know, if you speak 3 languages, you're trilingual. If you speak 2 languages, you're bilingual. And if you speak 1 language, you're an American.
That's true.
That's right. So we're happy for bilingual in Quebec.
I know in Israel, there were kids. I mean, when I was leading our volunteer trips over there were kids that spoke 4 languages, kids. And I thought, man, oh man, I can't even, I got shalom down. And these kids are speaking fluently 4 languages.
It's exciting to have young people across North America who are learning and anxious to learn, Chris. That's what we talk about, how it's advantageous to Friends of Israel that we have them in strategic places, but they're thrilled because they want to engage. You know, there might be somebody listening. Well, maybe it's the 9th listener. I don't know, but maybe there's somebody out there who's saying, you know, I would love to engage in the Jewish community. I don't exactly know how. Well, you've just given them a roadmap as to how they can do it. And Chris, they're not just young people. They're a diverse group, male and female, old and young, who are taking bridges and who are becoming Tikva volunteers. And it is expanding. I think we have
across ethnicities too. We've got people from all different countries that are coming to engage and learn. It's amazing.
It is amazing. And you know what? You and I can't take any credit.
None.
The Lord Jesus is just like he was in the time of Daniel. We're going to be talking about it. Maybe that's a good way to segue as I keep blooping in and out, to segue into how God took not just Daniel, but 3 of his friends, and they were certainly prime people. They were chosen by Nebuchadnezzar, but God took what Nebuchadnezzar chose and enhance them even more.
That's right. That's right. You know, just to catch our listeners up on where we are, we're picking up a kind of on the latter half of the book of Daniel in chapter 1. And last week we looked at how Daniel and his 3 compatriots were in Babylon, and they were actually chosen for a purpose because they were going to be working in the king's court, in Nebuchadnezzar's court. And so they needed to be plumped up. They needed to be educated in the Babylonian ways as Jewish men. And so in order not to defile themselves, as it says, they asked if they could not, eat the king's food and drink the king's wine. And that kind of startled the person that is in charge of them, because that this is the system and this is from the king himself. So you're asking me to do something that the king ordered, which I maybe he thought he could get himself in trouble by doing this. But Daniel said, just let us eat, some basic foods, vegetables, and we promise, we trust in God that he's going to make us even more fit and suitable than everybody else who's eating the king's food. And so God did it. God did a miracle, while everyone else is probably eating pork and pig and all the fatty foods, and they're getting prepped for the king. There's Daniel eating, vegetables, and all of a sudden he still has the capacity. He goes before he looks perfectly fine. He's fit, however he's supposed to look, and then some, it says. So God was prepping him for this moment, but in the middle of a Gentile world, Steve, in the middle of a Gentile world, they're not in Israel anymore. In the middle of a Gentile world, they're striving to maintain their Jewish identity, even though the systems are forcing them to embrace a Babylonian Gentile way. Now, all of a sudden, Daniel and his friends are going to work tirelessly to make sure they maintain their Jewish identity and they're not defiled in a Gentile world.
Well, Chris, Daniel was Tom Brady before Tom Brady became Tom Brady.
Go on. I like this.
Now, what do I mean by that?
He's
Tom
the GOAT.
Brady, when he was quarterback first for New England Patriots and then for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, lived for 23 years in the NFL as an extremely disciplined person.
Oh,
he would not let any kind of trait. Now, he's not Jewish. Unclean. Everything had to be clean. He eats to this day clean. You could go online, which I've done before, to read about the diet that Tom Brady has. He's never eaten a strawberry. He doesn't eat tomatoes because those kinds of things promote joint issues. And so Daniel, before Tom Brady wasn't born during Daniel's time, but he did that. He would not eat the treif. And in addition, Chris, he didn't do what at least the Steve Herzig would do, sometimes being blunt and pushy. He didn't say, hey, I'm not going to eat that treif. I'm Jewish. I'm not going to do that. He went and he asked kindly. He just said, look, I understand how difficult this is, but let's do a test. This won't hurt you in any way. You check me out. And if it works, sei gesund, everything's good. Live and be well. And that's exactly what happened. So I note not only the stand that Daniel took, but the way in which he handled it. I think he handled it with grace. It's a real encouragement to you and I in any situation as we're with folks who don't agree with our theology. We don't ram things down people's throats. We try to be gracious to people, to listen to them, to understand where they're coming from. And I think that's exactly what Daniel did. He was considerate of the situation that the guards had, and it worked out great for everybody.
Another thing to highlight, too, when we're thinking about Daniel is that Jesus talks about on the Sermon on the Mount, especially from the book of Luke, Jesus highlights this concept of the times of the Gentiles, which I believe gets worked out here as we're going to be studying through the book of Daniel. I'm going to read this really quick because it says, when you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let all those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been and all that has been written. How dreadful is it will these days be for pregnant women and nursing mothers? There will be great distress in the land and wrath against the people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And so even prophetically, Jewish people at this time had a concept of the times of the Gentiles, which I believe roots back to this moment in the book of Daniel. And if you notice, Daniel's primary concern as he's sharing these visions that God's giving with him are a lot to do with the times of the Gentiles. There is a transition that happens between the kingdom of God as it was kind of functioning in Israel, and then when they get kicked out of the land, now all of a sudden Israel is entering into the time, or Israel as a land is entering into the times of the Gentiles. And maybe, Steve, you want to develop that a little more before we get into Daniel.
Well, it's going to be shortly after this that he's going to talk about Babylon through that statue. Babylon is gold. As the king has this dream, and Daniel will be the only one who can interpret it, the times of the Gentiles really begins this way. And the language changes in the book of Daniel as well. It's very interesting that it goes from Hebrew to Aramaic. I find that interesting as we think of the theme of the book. But these future, for Daniel, nations, the present one being Babylon, then of Medo-Persia, then of Greece, then of Rome. And Chris, we're still living in the times of the Gentiles, aren't we?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to highlight, is that technically we're still living in the times of the Gentiles. There's still an essence of control that the Gentiles have over the land. And even, to really understand the times of the Gentiles, we'd have to go back and study Deuteronomy chapter 28, 29, and 30 to see what was going on.
The blessings and the curses. And of course, the curses are longer than the blessings.
That's right.
That's the way it usually is.
Exactly. There's a line there, though, in Daniel chapter 20, Deuteronomy 28, where it talks about the fact that, if Israel follows the Lord and maintains their relationship with the Lord, then what will happen is Israel will be the head of the nations, not the tail. And so it's only 14 verses is the blessings. The other, what is it, 50 verses are curses?
Sure, it follows wherever we go.
And so it says, though, if you go back and you read through Deuteronomy 28 and you read about the cursings, now all of a sudden Israel is the tail if they're not following. And so, which means that the Gentile nations are the ones leading. But that was never God's intent. God's intent was not to have Israel as the tail. It was to have Israel as the head. It says that Israel wouldn't be borrowing from nations financially. It says if they follow the Lord, that Israel would be lending to nations. The enemies would come in, but then they'd scatter 7 different ways. But if they didn't follow, they would be borrowing from nations. If they didn't follow, then they'd be their enemies would scatter them. And so, again, you have this picture of the times of the Gentiles is in relationship to Israel's disobedience to God's will for them and to God's plan and their lack of following him. And so, you see this concept. Not only is Daniel talking about the times of the Gentiles, even Jesus on the Olivet Discourse, when he's talking about the future of Israel, when he's talking about prophetic events that will take place, says that all these things must happen in order for the times of the Gentiles to come to its completion. So there is an end to the times of the Gentiles, Steve. That's the big thing.
Yes. And, in the text at the end of chapter 1, Chris, here they are, prisoners away from their families, by themselves, teenagers. We already talked about the stand that they took. And in verse 17, it says, as for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And in verse 19, it says, the king interviewed them, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in the realm. Chris, here they are living in the midst of captivity for them. Nebuchadnezzar already picked the best, but God made them better. God made them better. And that concept of being made better can be applied, honestly, I believe, when we become new creatures. We don't all become smart. You know, I graduated in the top 10% of the lower third of my class, and he never made me smarter. But I would argue that he made me better. And so he equipped me as he equips all his children, all of them, to be a better version of themselves. It's remarkable to hear. Here I am visiting every meal with those who are at the end of their journey. There, as I said, and there's missionaries here, retired missionaries that are here, people who are in business. They're in the latter part of their journey, and they share how God has used them through the years and their family. Easily, the consensus is, as a person commits themselves to the Lord Jesus after they're saved and become new creatures, he enables them to be a better version of themselves, fit for the master's use, to go on to minister for him. And the wonderful examples that I have here, I think could be applied to what God did for Daniel and his three friends.
And you know, I love that you brought that up too, because Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, all of them were actually working from a deficit according to human standards. And the deficit was they put themselves in that deficit. And the deficit is the king wanted them to do a certain thing, eat certain foods, because they knew that this would produce what the king wanted. And yet they said, no, we don't want to eat that. We're going to maintain our obedience to the Father. We're going to maintain our obedience to his call in our lives. We don't want to defile ourselves. And we promise you we'll be even better, as you said. And sure enough, even from a deficit of eating only those vegetables, God made them better. And they were actually set apart in the king's court as being having a reputation for being better, which is so fascinating that it kind of seems to stem back to the concept of obedience and following God in faith. You know, this is, I think we might have mentioned this last week, but, you know, a lot of times when kids go away to college, they use that freedom to kind of break the shackles of the rules and regulations that their parents had under their roof. I went to Bible college, and I can tell you this. I always thought it was fascinating, you know, how kids would come. They grew up in a Christian home. They had the rules. They had the regulations. But now that mom and dad are not around, guess what? I'm going to do what I want to do. And a lot of times they are run contrary to the rules that maybe they grew up with. And so here's Daniel and his three friends, and you'd think that this was an opportunity to break free of the confines of the law that, you know, bound them. Maybe they looked at it as a negative thing, but they didn't. They saw it as a positive thing in their faith with the Lord, their walk with the Lord, and their obedience to the Lord, and God blessed that. And he's blessing it even outside of the land in Babylon, which is amazing. And Steve, I can't help but think it took faith to do that. It took faith. And, you know, you and I were talking before we got on the podcast, and we were just thinking about our Friends of Israel team that take those steps of faith to remain obedient to the call that God had. And it's amazing to see some of the similarities there between Daniel and his friends, and even some of our amazing staff that are serving globally all around the world.
It is exciting. You know, you and I talk about staying in your lane. We talk about that all the time. We're North American Ministries. We're called to a specific ministry, and under that umbrella is individual calls of our workers, and they're called to different kinds of work under the banner of North American Ministry. And the beauty is, as Daniel and his friends stayed in their lane, in the sense of by faith, they conducted themselves as observant Jewish people to commit to the Lord that they loved. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And God accomplished great things through them. We think of our staff. Chris, we have a varied staff, different gifts, different abilities. quite frankly, I could not do. I am not capable of some of the kinds of ministries that our people have. They couldn't do what I do. They stay in their lane, and God is blessing them. One of the neat things that I shared here in Pittsburgh is Charles Furrow, who was diagnosed with a cancer, a first stage of pancreatic cancer. And so I told the folks there, oh, you get a diagnosis like that, and that means you're done. You know, you're done. You have to concentrate on your health. Well, that's not what Charles did. He stayed in his lane. He knew the circumstances he was in, and he reported to us 5 days after the surgery on Chapel that he was witnessing to the oncologist, to the surgeon. He was doing nothing different than what he would do if he was healthy, except that instead of going to the Holocaust Museum as a docent, he had to go to the hospital for surgery with his cap on his head and things going into his arm and all that. He's sharing the gospel. That is being the best you, staying in your lane. Charles was Tom Brady before Tom Brady.
Charlie, he is Tom Brady before Tom Brady. We love Charles Furrow.
Disciplined. That's how God blesses. And it is an amazing thing to see Daniel, his friends, an amazing thing. Chris, why don't you highlight a couple of the newer folks that really God gave in a call to our work?
Yeah, you know, that what the amazing team that comes to mind is Carrie Gould recently came on with the Friends of Israel, and she serves up in the New Jersey, New York City area. And she just does an amazing job, like you said, of staying in her lane, remaining obedient to the Lord, and trusting in Him, and with a passion. And that's the thing, is that all of our staff share the same passion. They might have different gifts, but they share the same passion to bring physical and spiritual comfort, as we say in our mission statement, to the Jewish people. It's a part of the DNA of who we are. And Carrie Gould is so active in the Jewish community as a Christian in the New Jersey and New York City area. She gets invited all the time to events, and she gets invited to mahjong, and she gets invited to participate in Jewish political events, religious events. She goes to the JCC. She's a professional painter, and she gives painting lessons at the JCC. She has a reputation that precedes her, and she's working from a deficit. She does. She works. Whenever you're in ministry, you're often working from a deficit. This isn't a for-profit organization. It's a non-profit organization. She's out raising funds. So even from a deficit, even financially, you know, she's completely dependent on the Lord, on what He would supply for her financially. In the same way that Daniel was at a deficit with the food that he was eating, and yet God provided and made it even better. It's amazing how we see that even from a deficit, being a nonprofit, needing to raise funds to do the things that God calls us to do, God continues to bless and provide for us in all of it.
Chris, I'm glad you brought up Carrie, who is an artist, as you said, and she has chutzpah. She's a very soft-spoken person. So her chutzpah isn't like me with a loud voice and all that. The folks here at the village are
She wouldn't get a word. She doesn't get a word in with you, Steve.
But the folks are telling me here at the village, they said, it's so refreshing. We could hear you. Yeah. We never hear our speakers. We can hear you. So I have to tell my wife that being loud is sometimes okay. But Carrie.
It has its perks.
Carrie has, she paints pictures and gives them away. Mm-hmm. I mean, she sells some, but she gives them away. She gives lessons to families, Jewish families who call her up. She puts her name up and says, hey, I'll if you're interested in lessons for painting, I'll do that. And they say, wait, why are you doing this? You're not even Jewish. She said, I love the Jewish people. This is the gift God gave me, and I'm really glad to do that. You know, Chris, what struck me about Carrie is she's a widow. And when
twice over a widow, twice over.
And when she first came with us and got involved in the Jewish community, one of the Jewish gals she met invited her to a recovery group, and Carrie told me
a widow's recovery group.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. She said, I didn't want to go to a widow's recovery thing. She said, I miss my husband, but I know he's in a better place, but you know what? I'm going to go. I'm not going for me. I'm going for these ladies, and they love her.
Yes.
She gives such hope and encouragement. They wonder, how has she overcome, as you described, that deficit, losing your husband, and in her case twice, but losing her husband. She says, well, my faith is, I have faith. And it's not just I have faith in faith. I have faith in the living God and have a relationship with him. And there are ladies who said, I'd like to talk to you more about this faith. Chris, that is working from a deficit, but empowered by the living God, just like Daniel and his friends.
I also am reminded when she first started with Friends of Israel, she was invited by the Jewish Community Center. She offered her services to teach painting classes at the Jewish Community Center. And the lady came up to her and said, oh, I'm so thankful that you would do this. How much are your services that we have to pay you in order to teach these classes? And she goes, oh, nothing. It's free. I want to be able to give.
Did she say it 7 times? Free.
If she didn't, she should have. But I think it struck a nerve. Not a nerve. It struck the heart of this particular person that puts these together, because she couldn't believe that a professional individual, and when I say Carrie is a professional artist, she is a professional artist, and she deserves to be paid by her gifts that she has, but she doesn't want payment. And the lady goes, why did you do this? Why would you do this for free? And she goes, because I love the Jewish people with a biblical love. And so honestly, it strikes at the conscience, I think, of the Jewish people to think about Carrie. And like you said, she isn't this loud, boisterous person like me and you. She's quiet, she's soft-spoken, but she can really pack a punch when it comes to showing the love of the Messiah Jesus in the actions that she has, even working from a deficit like a lot of our representatives do. So when we were reading through this, Steve, we couldn't help but think of not just Friends of Israel representatives, but people who are doing ministry. God empowers us by the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives to serve him. And the thing that I believe we're seeing from this that he wants the most is that we're out in the world, because the world is like Babylon. As we're out in the world, he wants us to remain obedient to him, even when it seems like it's coming from a deficit. God will provide even from a deficit as we serve him.
It is amazing, Chris. I'm really excited about this text and staying in your lane. I never thought that I'd be talking about that on the podcast. We talk about it all the time in our office, but staying in your lane and Tom Brady, 2 things I never thought I'd bring up at the podcast.
Well, just as we wrap up Daniel chapter 1, I just want to let you know, it says, and Daniel remained there in Babylon until the first year of King Cyrus. So that means Daniel was in Babylon. He was probably born around 620 BC, and he was exiled to Babylon in 605 BC, so about 15 years old. And then he remained there until 538 BC, very long time.
Hey, he could have qualified for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, maybe he got some Social Security or something from the Babylonians. But he did witness something amazing. This is something for us to talk about because it will appear as it's developing in the book of Daniel, is that Daniel sees an amazing thing happen. He watches one Gentile empire get gobbled up by another Gentile empire, which is something that he saw in a vision. So he was actually able to see, there's a reason that this is at the end of Daniel chapter 1. He saw a transition from one empire to another, which was something that the Lord said would happen in the visions of Nebuchadnezzar. And so Daniel was able to witness the faithfulness of God and seeing these things through. And I'm sure when he passed away in the first year of King Cyrus, he knew this is exactly what the Lord said would happen.
It's amazing, Chris. Just amazing.
Well, all right. Well, we're going to continue our study in Daniel chapter 2 next week. We'll keep going. I think you'll be back here in the podcast room, right, Steve? Next week.
I will. Next week I blooped out again, but next week I won't be blooping.
Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll bloop you just to get you feeling, bloopy or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen. Let's go to our news. Steve sent some great news articles my way over the past few days. And so, Steve, we've got some great articles. The first one that pops up is that the UN detains the Israeli ambassador. This is big. The UN general meeting is happening. That means Netanyahu is in New York. Joe Biden is also in New York, along with the Iranian president, who's also in New York. Joe Biden is using this as an opportunity, Steve, to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu. But notice they're not meeting at the White House, Steve. They're meeting in New York at the UN General Meeting, and so General Assembly. And so it's a little bit of a different kind of diplomatic relationship. He wasn't invited to the White House, but they're deciding to shake hands and see each other in New York. It speaks volumes if you think about the relationship between Israel and America right now.
But Joe Biden is staying in his lane, Chris. He stays in his lane. It's the Obama lane. If you remember the way Netanyahu was treated by President Obama, he actually came to the White House, but he had to come through the back door, literally.
Yep.
I mean, literally. They don't normally do that for a prime minister of a country. Not only did he have to, he actually went through the kitchen. The prime minister of a country had to go through the kitchen. And the Obamas were eating and came down. They made him wait. I'm telling you that because the vice president at that time was Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, it took him months to thank or congratulate Netanyahu upon his victory. Joe Biden has not been at all interested in really embracing the leader, and yet he calls him his best friend. Oh, we go back all these years. If that's the way you treat friends, I would hate to be one of Joe Biden's enemies.
That's right.
All I could say.
That's right. You can't. You're not invited to his house. You got to go meet at some meeting space or whatever, away from your home.
Exactly. And in the video that I sent you, the UN security guards actually took out this ambassador. They escorted him out because he protested the speaker who was an Iranian leader. The speaker was overseeing a woman who did not wear a hijab, an Iranian woman who was killed. And so he paraded her picture around in the UN meeting and immediately was escorted out in an unceremoniously way, too, Chris, as you view the video. I think you're linking that article or video so that folks could see it. It's not great. The idea of murder somebody for their religious freedom in the UN and to protest that it's mind-boggling to me. One of our co-workers, Chris, named Martha, asked me when she texted me this morning, she said, I wonder how people would react to Netanyahu when he speaks. We already know people have walked out on him. They voluntarily walked out. To be escorted out, to me, is just, it's a sham. We don't want to be political, you and I here at the Jew and Gentile podcast, but you can't help but being a little political as you talk about world events and reporting them. It's just a shame. And I just say Joe Biden has stayed in his lane.
Well, the United Nations was founded after the Holocaust, in response to the Holocaust, and the human rights atrocities that happened during the Holocaust. And so it's interesting to me that a Jewish man has to hold up a sign of a woman who faced a human rights issue by the president. The president's the Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, that Steve was talking about. And so it's interesting because it took a Jewish man to say, look at these human rights atrocities. Here's the UN. The UN was designed to make sure these things don't happen again. And yet we're giving a platform to the president of Iran, the leading state sponsor of terrorism, not just in the world, but also in their own country. And so, it says in the article by JNS that we posted that Gilead Erdan, who is the Israeli ambassador, was temporarily detained, but then released with assistance from Israeli security and a diplomatic team. The UN police temporarily detained Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilead Erdan, after the diplomat held a photo during a talk on the floor by Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. Video footage was provided by JNS, that's the Jewish news, which was told that Erdan was released with the assistance of Israeli security and diplomatic teams. And it says this, quote, while the butcher of Tehran is speaking at the UN and is being respected by the international community, hundreds of Iranians are protesting outside, shouting and calling on the international community to wake up and to help them, Erdan said. It is a disgrace that the member states say to listen to a mass murderer. It is interesting, Steve, when you compare Israel to Iran. Here, I am sure more people at the UN are talking about judicial reform in Israel. I'm sure they're talking more about the upheaval that's happening politically in Israel than they are about what's going on in Iran right now.
Not only that, Chris, Joe Biden just gave them a little bit of spending money, didn't he?
That's exactly right.
$7 billion.
Yeah. For the release of the American hostages in Iran, they did a swap and then they released $6 billion from South Korea.
6. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
See, I wanted a perfect number 7, so I got 6, which is the number of man.
Exactly.
So that makes it even more interesting. $6 billion. Chris, it's always been a joke that the number one violator of human rights, according to the United Nations, is Israel, not North Korea, not Iran, not I'm trying to think. North Korea. What's another axis of evil country?
North Korea, Iran, China is an issue.
China. Yeah. There you go. Thank you, China. And they have much lower rates, according to the UN, of human rights violations. And yet, if you were, which has been done, the surveys have been taken with anonymous Palestinians. They had to be anonymous because they were worried about getting killed. Would you rather live under the Palestinian rule or under Israeli rule? And they all say Israel.
100%.
Why? Because they would have religious freedom.
Yep. Exactly. No, well, I mean, but that's the thing that's funny to me about the way that the world works is that Israel is certainly dealing with political strife right now. There's no doubt about that.
No doubt.
But I'll tell you this, Israel has the ability to vote in a new government and change the entire way of how the judicial reform is going. They have every right to do that. Their voices can be heard in a democracy. It's just funny to me how much the reason why Biden is not meeting Netanyahu at the White House is because of the way that the government is managing Netanyahu's government is managing judicial reform. Biden doesn't like it, but then all of a sudden they'll give $6 billion to Iran in a swap. And I love this. They say, don't worry, we're going to account for every dollar that we give to the Iranians to make sure it doesn't go to any terrorism. I think that's hilarious. So basically, you freed up $6 billion to go to terrorism as they keep track of all the things they're going to do to help their infrastructure in Iran. It's just, the world always seems a little bit backwards, very backwards, actually, when it comes to understanding Israel in relationship to the nations.
Well, Chris, the very fact that you know what's going on in Israel, you know the foibles that they have, you know the black marks that they might have. You don't know in Iran, you don't know in China. That's the characteristic of a democracy. You have to display your dirty laundry, like I have to tell people when I bloop out. You have to be transparent.
That's right. I'm trying to get you to stop doing that, and you're like, you're just telling everybody. Maybe that makes me more of a dictator of this thing.
Well,
so
you see, the idea in Israel is that and the United States, as we still have it, you can be critical of things that we do, right, left, in the middle, it doesn't matter. Countries that don't have that, no one knows what's going on. That's why so many people want to be here in this country.
Steve, I want to transition here because we were talking about Iran, but recently Netanyahu is not only meeting with Biden in the United Nations, but he's also met already with Elon Musk.
Oh, that was great.
In San Francisco. And so you sent a video. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I've been busy and I haven't had a chance to sit down and look at the video yet. But you had a big smile on your face when you saw the video of Musk and Netanyahu together.
Well, they discussed all kinds of topics. Elon Musk was accused of being anti-Semitic, and Bibi was with him. And as they were walking in his plant, Bibi had this huge smile, and you could hear him say, "This is the future now." And he's walking. He's got his security guys with him. He's viewing all the things that are going on at Tesla, and they got a Cybertruck, Chris, and his security guards are with Netanyahu, and he wants to ride in the Cybertruck, and he gets in the car or the truck, and Elon Musk is driving. And at first they go slow, and the security people are kind of walking on the side. And then Elon Musk puts the pedal to the metal, and boom, they drive away. And Netanyahu just he looked like a kid in a candy store. And I have to admit, if I ever had that opportunity, oops, I just blooped out. But if I ever had a chance to do that, I would have a smile as well. The technology that Elon Musk had a live show on YouTube yesterday. I know a little. I saw a little of it. He's announcing another car, one that's supposed to be $20,000.
Wow!
I didn't get all the information about it, but he's trying to make it affordable for everyone. And anyway,
Steve, I got my first EV car when I went to Tampa, and I had a rental. I had my first electric vehicle car. It was hilarious. I will tell you, I got EV stress.
I heard about that. We have a new issue. EV stress.
Yeah, it's the EV stress. Where am I going to charge this thing? Now, that's the reason I really wanted a Tesla, because everywhere I drive, I see Tesla chargers. I see how they work. I've just from observation. But I didn't have a Tesla. They gave me another one. And I thought to myself, where do I even go with this thing? So fortunately, I only had the car for 2 days. I had plenty of battery. But still, you're driving around and you're thinking, I don't know how this thing works. And it's a little unnerving. But I will say, you're worried about where you're going to get a recharge, but the drive is also very nice as well. So anyway, it was my first time taking a EV around. And I will say,
you and Bibi could smile together. I bet you had a big smile. You sent me a picture.
I sent you a picture
of that Mustang.
Hey, it's like a futuristic car. It's like going to space. All right. Well, the Israeli prime minister also met with Elon Musk to talk about anti-Semitism. This comes from the AP News, where it says that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu kicked off a U.S. trip in California to talk about not only the cars that we were just talking about, but also about anti-Semitism on his social media platform X, which is formerly Twitter. While Musk asked him to address his judicial overhaul in Israel, the two also discussed artificial intelligence and the sparsely attended live stream event on Monday. So it's really interesting to talk about this concept of anti-Semitism. Stephen, I want your take on this. Anti-Semitism on social media platforms and coupling that with free speech. And I think that's kind of the rub, is that, free speech and anti-Semitism. How do you understand the two, Steve? I'm interested in your thoughts, your wise Jewish sage on this.
I don't have a lot of wisdom on that. If a platform is free, in other words, there's freedom, other than the restraint of law, which is don't yell fire in a theater, that kind of thing, any kind of violence or threats to people. Look, there are people who hold different views. if you have a platform that allows for the sharing of ideas, even if they're contrary to yours, what about us, Chris, as believers? Could we share the gospel on a Twitter and not have it taken off to counter the kinds of things going on? Look, I don't like anti-Semitism. I think it's terrible. And I think you have to have a governor, if you will. A governor is used on in amusement parks for when kids drive little cars and stuff. It only goes so fast. I think you need to have some restraint, but only not in the sharing of ideas, but in the words that you use to share your ideas. I think that's fair, but it is a pickle. It is tricky.
It is,
and I think it's something that Elon Musk is trying to maneuver and trying to figure out, as opposed to what was before, where somebody arbitrarily, based on their own interests, shut down people and allowed other people to share controversial things. I think Elon is trying. I don't think he's there, but I have hope as he tries to maneuver and direct that it will happen fairly, reasonably fairly.
To me, the rub is this, is that in free speech, I want people to let me know what they think. Hey, if you have an anti-Semitic issue and you say it online, guess what? I know who you are now. It gives me clarity. The thing that worries me, so I really don't care what people say on social media because it gives me information about who you are. That's one thing. So I don't, people should be able to say what they want. Here's where I get nervous, though, is that what people say, for me, I have a filter, a grid through which I process anti-Semitism that is a biblical one and one that understands the history of anti-Semitism. But what about those people, Steve, that don't have that biblical worldview? And what about those people that don't understand the history of the Holocaust and the anti-Semitism that Jewish people have faced for millennia? That's where I get nervous that somebody's words, they have the right to say it, but I get nervous that it will impact people who are more ignorant about the issue, and which only perpetuates at that point anti-Semitism or any type of racism.
That's why it's a tough road to maneuver. Triggers. What sometimes our words trigger people. You can't control other people. I agree that we should say what we want, unless it's something that's promoting killing and murdering and harming people. But yeah, identifying people for who they are is better. It's always better. Chris, we got to move on only because I've got to have lunch with fellow old people. So
okay, well, here we go. This is the Yiddish word of the day. Then I just turned the music on, Steve, for Yiddish word of the day. Hey, can I set it up this way, Steve, for our Yiddish word? We talked about the fact that Daniel, he and his friends found a lot of great favor with the king of Babylon, and
yes,
they probably became close. And maybe they exchanged some terms of endearment for one another in some way.
Let me hear the Gentiles say the term of endearment.
The term of endearment, the Yiddish term of endearment is Moyshele. Is that right?
Moyshele, yeah, I love it.
Moyshele. That is a term of endearment. Steve, you have to tell me if I'm wrong here, but is that often used more in marriages? Is that something somebody?
Well, that would be used of a wife talking to her husband. It's male, so you could. But I could hear Daniel saying to Nebuchadnezzar, "Moyshele,
Moyshele."
How's it going?
That's right.
Yeah, we're close. After all, he shared the dream. He shared his dream and interpreted it. He said, Moyshele, I'll take care of you.
That's great. Well, I know in Hebrew there's a few different terms of endearment, like chamudi, which means like you sweetie. That's one that they like to use, chamudi, or chamuda for women. And then they also, I get this a lot, hever, which means, or no, gever, which means friend. You're a friend.
Yep.
So,
President Clinton used that years ago as president. He said Chaver about Israel. They had big posters of him when I was visiting Israel during his presidency. Yeah. definitely a term of endearment.
Well, Moyshele is our Yiddish word for a term of endearment.
Moyshele. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar was ever regarded as a Moyshele.
Well, maybe just for a moment when everything was nice and smooth and everything was working for them. But hey, listen, Moyshele is the Yiddish word of the day. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining the Jew and Gentile podcast. We got to get Steve to lunch.
Get to lunch.
He's got to get to lunch. He's got to get to lunch to be with his people, to talk to them. Always something. Well, listen, be sure. Steve is going to be doing his second class on the Fall Feast of Israel. You can join us by registering at foiequip.org. If you haven't done that yet, be sure to get there. You can register for free. Yom Kippur is the topic. And then the following week, he's going to be teaching on the Feast of Tabernacles. Next October, our very own scholar in residence, Peter COLÓN, will be teaching on Sabbath. You won't want to miss it. You can register for all these classes and other ways to get involved with the Friends of Israel by going to foiequip.org. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you next week.